What's up, guys? Thank you for tuning in to the Uncommon Mindset podcast. Today, I'm joined by a very, very special guest. Today, I'm joined by Dan Strauss. I'll just give you a brief background on who Dan is. Dan, also known as the Raspberry Ape, is a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu black belt and the 10 times world champion Roger Gracie. Dan has been training Brazilian Jiu Jitsu for over 12 years, and in that time, he has achieved a successful competitive career. Examples include a British and English champion at black belt, NAGA elite European champion, and the #1 ranked black belt by the UKBJJA. Dan also has been invited to and competed in the world's biggest submission grappling tournaments, such as Polaris, ADCC, and the Eddie Bravo Invitational. In his spare time, he also does commentating for the likes of Cage Warriors, and also he has his own podcast channel too. What an honor it is to have you on the podcast today.
It's my pleasure, mate. Thank you for having me.
No worries. I just want to start off by asking Dan, I want to take it back. Can you just talk to me about like your upbringing? What was that like?
Yeah, pretty good. No complaints, really. I think one of the main things about my sort of childhood, I started jiu-jitsu around about 14, 15 years old, probably close to 15 years old, really. And a lot of people expect that I was sort of into sports and that I was an athletic, or I was a big, strong kid, which I wasn't at all. I was a very skinny, very unathletic kid. Never really played any sports, or very few sports growing up. I tried that, I was moderate, I wasn't super lazy or sedentary or anything, but definitely wasn't a very sporty kid, which a lot of people expect. So it wasn't really until I got into Brazilian Jiu Jitsu where I really got a real passion for any sport and went from there.
Yeah. What made you actually start Brazilian Jiu Jitsu? Because I believe back in the day, right? It wasn't that, was it that big at the time?
No, absolutely not. And the answer to that question is I didn't, basically. The answer to that question is that it was a fortuitous occasion, and that I kind of fell into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I was interested in martial arts, and I wanted to do martial arts, and I started doing Japanese Jiu-Jitsu at what at the time was Mill Hill Jiu-Jitsu Club, teaching Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. And I was there for about 6 months until one of the instructors left, and the other instructor took over, who had already begun doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and that was Nick Brooks. And then he basically turned the Japanese Jiu-Jitsu club into a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu club over the space of about 6 months. It was like a little bit of hybrid, we did a little bit of everything and a bit of grappling. And then one day he was just like, we're just going to go pure grappling, all this other stuff is crap. So I was lucky enough but you could say that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu found me. I didn't even find it. Didn't know what it was until I was already doing it.
Wow, that's brilliant. Yeah. Is there a huge difference between Japanese Jiu-Jitsu and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu?
Well, instead of looking at the differences, it's better to look at the similarities. And the similarities are the name, and that's just about it. They couldn't be more different. It is just the name. And, really the name it just means the gentle art, and it is just a name that comes from sort of the Japanese roots of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I believe the story that I was told actually was that, because of course Jiu-Jitsu comes from, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu comes from judo. It doesn't come from Jiu-Jitsu at all. It comes from judo, and it comes from Maeda coming over to Brazil and teaching the Gracie's judo. He wasn't teaching them Jiu-Jitsu, but my understanding is that he was not allowed to call what he was doing judo, because he was doing challenge matches and he was doing competitions, and that they would have looked upon very unfavorably the fact that he was doing these challenge matches in the name of judo. So instead he said that he did jiu-jitsu. So really, we do Brazilian judo.
Oh, it's interesting, that is. Yeah, I never thought of that. I spoke to Robert Drysdale the other day, and he's doing like a documentary on jiu-jitsu.
Yes.
And where it started and stuff like that. And we talked about the difference between Brazilian and American jiu-jitsu. And he just mentioned that like anyone can just say that I can literally just say that what I'm doing is Marat's jiu-jitsu. A lot of people, they try to put like a word on it, but it's not that way. Jiu-jitsu is jiu-jitsu. And talk to me about, because I know Roger Gracie, right? He's a legend in the sport. What was it like
Mm.
being under him, training under him?
Well, to be honest, most of my training didn't come under Roger himself. Most of my training came under Nick Brooks, who was a Roger Gracie black belt. So my instruction, Nick was who I did all of my learning under, even though I did go and, train with Roger on occasions. Roger had very little influence on my jiu-jitsu game directly. He was just the head of the association, basically, that was awarding out the black belt. So that's who. And of course, when the greatest grappler of all time wants to give you a black belt, you don't say no.
Yeah.
But in terms of influence over my training, even though I was definitely inspired, and you can't do jiu-jitsu and not look at what Roger does and be inspired by his style of grappling. In terms of pure influence on my game, Roger had very little. So most of my influence came very early on from Nick Brooks, who was my instructor, and then from sort of my own development and watching other grapplers that I felt that whose styles that I really liked, such as Marcelo Garcia. I feel like Marcelo Garcia is like one of my instructors, even though I've never done a class under him, because I took a lot of influence from him and from his style and from his techniques in grappling. So I think that's how it works. It's something that I've spoken about. I remember speaking about it very early on my podcast with Simon Hayes, sort of this hidden lineage that you have, which is just because you haven't been given a black belt from someone, you can learn from lots of different people. So that was kind of like that for me. But yeah, definitely an honor to be graded under Roger and have, obviously Nick Brooks, my instructor, would have spent a lot more time learning directly under Roger, and that's going to filter down through me as well. But yeah, it's an honor.
That's amazing. Yeah. For the people who don't do jiu-jitsu, I've been doing it for nearly 2.5 years now. I train under Chris Reese and Ash Williams, and, incredible coaches as well. And what would you say for those people who don't do jiu-jitsu? Like, what is the benefits of jiu-jitsu, would you say?
It's one of those things. Jiu-jitsu is, obviously, I might be a little bit biased considering, I live and breathe it basically. And I kind of don't understand what life would be like without it. Depends where you're coming from. It depends. People want different things from life. Some people would want from a martial art, they want something that's fun. They want a hobby. And to that, it is a lot of fun. It's very challenging. It's very cerebral. It's very intellectually and mentally stimulating and taxing, and it forces you to think about a lot of things. For the nerd who wants to get deep into stuff, it's absolutely vast in that respect. For some people, they want health, and for that, they want to do a sport. They want to do something that keeps them active. It's one of the greatest things that you can do. It's testing every single aspect of your physicality, be it speed, strength, agility, mobility, balance. All of these things get tested, and if they get tested, they get built as well. And then some people looking to get into it to feel confident, or to feel that they want to learn how to fight or protect themselves. And some of them just want the ability to beat up anyone in the room. So for all of these different things, it kind of ticks all of those boxes. There's very few things that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu doesn't give you, unless you just want to. The one thing that I have to say, if you don't want things that are hard, stay away, because it is tough, So that's the only thing. But apart from that, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is great.
Yeah. Would you really say that it does help self-defense? Let's say, for example, because, I know a lot of people, they mention that, jiu-jitsu won't work in a street fight because, people will just be swinging at you and stuff like that. Would you say that it would work in a street fight scenario?
Look, there's absolutely nothing is 100%, and you can have someone who is a black belt in jiu-jitsu get knocked out or stabbed or kicked in the head or whatever you want. But the idea that it is ineffective on a street fight is crazy. It is unbelievably effective. Any martial art where you're able to, there's this misconception, and it's understandable. You have martial arts that are that would refer to themselves as a self-defense primarily. And then you have stuff like jiu-jitsu that is a sport primarily, even though realistically the Gracies actually look at it more as a self-defense. But for most people, especially over in the UK, it's a sport first and foremost. But when you have anything that's a sport, so jiu-jitsu, judo, wrestling, boxing, Thai boxing, any of these things, these are all sports. They are martial arts that have been made safe enough to be practiced at 100% 100% aggression, 100%, nothing being held back. Then you have your self-defense martial arts, which will say, well, we can't do these 100% because our techniques are very deadly, lots of groin strikes, biting, eye gouging, stuff like that. Well, the problem is your techniques may be fantastic, but the big difference is that you're not able to practice them against resisting opponents, truly resisting opponents. And that's where Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and boxing and kickboxing and Muay Thai and wrestling and judo and all of these things really come into their own, is that once you've been doing Jiu Jitsu for a couple of years, you have hundreds and hundreds of hours of fighting experience, trying to do something against a human who is trying to stop you from doing that. And then when it comes to a realistic fighting situation, that is what's going to be the currency that you have in the bank. It's not going to be what you know, it's what you're used to doing against someone resisting. So I would back a blue belt with 2 years of jiu-jitsu under their belt over a black belt in Aikido in a street fight every day of the week. Wouldn't even question it. Every single day of the week I'd back them, because you're used to fighting. Now, does that mean that it is the be all and end all, the best thing that you can do for your self-defense is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? No, probably not. If your number one concern was self-defense, then Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and grappling would be one facet of the training that you would need to do. You want to do some boxing, you want to do some Thai boxing, you want to make sure that your clinch work is really good. You probably want to do some weapon defense stuff from something like Krav or Filipino martial arts, which again, Filipino martial arts, stick fighting, that are simulating the knives, and they go hard with each other. They put headgear on and gloves on and they smash the crap out of each other. So these guys are used to fighting as well. So, but the idea that jiu-jitsu isn't effective in a street fight, rubbish. If you're used to throwing people around on the mat, you put yourself in a much better position than not doing jiu-jitsu, and you probably put yourself, I think you put yourself in a better position than doing stuff that's advertised as self-defense training, but doesn't actually have any fighting against resisting opponent. That is the key.
Yeah, no, I always say, to all my friends and stuff that haven't done jiu-jitsu, I'm like, just try it once, please, just try it once, because I know if they try it once, they're gonna get hooked on it. It's so addictive. It's such an amazing thing to do. Like, talk to me about your training, Dan, because I know that you have a unique style of training, right? If someone goes on your Instagram, they can see all the training styles that you do. What made you, adapt to that training style?
Well, I've I got into jiu-jitsu and I was training jiu-jitsu. A lot of people don't know about me is that when I started jiu-jitsu, I was very, very small. So I started training jiu-jitsu, I was under 55 kilos. I think the first time I competed was at 55 kilos. So I was training from probably about 50 kilos, to be honest with you. I was young, it wasn't that I was in my mid-20s and 55 kilos. I was 15, but I was a small kid. And there were no kids classes back then. So I was just in with the adults. So I was getting bashed around a lot, not necessarily because people were better than me, but because they were bigger than me. And sometimes they were bigger and better than me. So I remember thinking, I just want to get stronger. I want to be able to compete against these guys. And then that kind of led me down the route of getting interested in doing some strength training. And I started looking up and reading about and researching different types of strength training. And what really jumped out to me was sort of the old time strongman styles of training. Because when you talk about strongman now, you think about, Hathor Bjornsson, the Mountain from Game of Thrones, or Eddie Hall, Bill Kazmaier, and all of these guys, which is great. I love it. I love that type of training. I think it's an awesome event, and spectacle, but that's not the same thing. These guys are huge, 150 to 200 kilo guys who are very good at moving weights and not much else. Old time strongman was very different. They were not huge guys. They were guys who were 70, 80, 90, maybe 100 kilos. Pre-steroids, their bodies were in very good proportion. They weren't humongous monsters who need these CPAP machines to be able to breathe because they're so heavy. And they were very often, they were wrestlers as well. So they understood what training they needed to be healthy, to be mobile, to be strong, and to do all of these things with grappling in mind. So for me, that was sort of the main inspiration. The that for a lot of my training early on. And I read a book called Dinosaur Training, which sort of feeds off of the back of that. And that's what got me into weightlifting. And then off of that, sort of, many years, probably 12 years of me, 13 years maybe of me lifting weights and adapting and developing and trying different things and being exposed to different methods of training and trying them out and sort of going with that whole Bruce Lee philosophy of, try and learn about everything and keep what you find useful and discard what you don't find useful. And that's where I've ended up where I am now. And, I'm enjoying it, and it's creative, and a lot of people can get bored of doing the same thing. And that, a lot of people are maybe resistant to change, and I don't think you should change just for the sake of things. But, the idea that I was just going to do bench press and back squat for 15 years and, for the next 30 years or whatever, it would have driven me crazy. So I like my training. I like the fact that I still have some core exercises in there and I can experiment with other stuff. And I find it effective and I find it fun.
That's class. No, that's amazing. It's good to hear that. And I know that when you were growing up, I'm not sure when it was, but you went through an injury, right? A back injury, is it?
Yeah, that's right. When I was about 21, when I first turned 21, I injured my back.
Okay. How did you, what kind of injury was it, and how did you overcome that? Because when people get injured, and especially if you're doing jiu-jitsu, right, you can't train. What was your mindset like during that?
Yeah, it was a tough one. The how of the injury is kind of sort of half a mystery. There were just theories about it, kind of like the Big Bang. You got a theory. It's probably what happened, but you're not 100% sure. You weren't there. You can't be certain. You can't test it. But not that I'm a creationist, and I do believe in the Big Bang, just for the record. But the theory of my back is that when I was when I was doing Japanese jiu-jitsu or doing the hybrid, and I was doing some striking stuff, I remember I had a back injury when I was about 15 through a high kick, and my back just kind of, something happened, wasn't good. And being 15 years old, I went home, rested for about a week, and then was absolutely fine and never thought about it again. And what probably happened there, or what the doctors are guessing happened there, was that I broke my back. So the disc is like this, and I cracked both sides of the disc. And because I was at the age when my growth plates were still soft and growing, they were able to fuse back together. And then later on, when I was lifting weights, I re-broke, one of those sides didn't heal back quite as well. And I re-broke that and did that, and sort of bulged it, herniated some of the discs in my back as well. And that's when that's when the injury that really floored me. Now, it's possible that the back break was beforehand, and the tightness from the back break caused some real tightness in my back, which then facilitated or increased the chances of me injuring my disc in the way that they did. But whatever happened, I had a bad back injury at about 21. And yeah, I was off the mat for a little bit, but, I was training twice a day, every day at that point. So, I was always just trying to get back on the mat. And, I was able to get back on the mat, but I was severely limited in my ability to function was significantly decreased. And then it was just a waiting game, really. It was a very long journey with my back injury to it's, I never say full recovery. It will always be there. The break is there, and the disc issues will always be there. And it's just about the functionality that you can get around that. But right now, the improvements that I've made are massive. And a lot of those have come actually more recently in the last couple of years. We're talking 9 years ago, 8-9 years ago that I had this injury. So, it is hard when you're off the mat. It wasn't the longest that I was off the mat for. So I had shoulder surgery about 5 years ago, and that had me off the mat, full stop, couldn't do a thing for a lot longer. The back injury was sort of off the mat for a little bit, but on the mat, but at like very, very reduced capacity. So it was a different sort of injury to sort of one of those where you're full blown off the mat, can't do anything, which is more like when I did my shoulder.
I see. And when you did your shoulder, did you ever think that, look, I'm not going to go back to it?
No, that was never really a something that I was thinking. You know, for me, jiu-jitsu is sort of
Life.
it's a constant. Yeah, you know, it's something. It's something that I can't imagine living without. So when you have these negative thoughts in your head, if you tell yourself that you might not be able to get back to something, very often you don't get back to that. You know, I thought I'm going to have because before I had my shoulder surgery, I was again significantly dysfunctional for about 9 months before I had the surgery. So I was, you know, it was, funnily enough, it's sort of the opposite. You think when you have this shoulder surgery and then you're off the mats, you think, I can't get back, you know, can I do jiu-jitsu? It was the opposite. The surgery was the thing that got me excited to get back on the mats, because actually the 9 months prior of me, the symptoms that I would have basically, or the expression of my injury, it was a labral tear. The expression of my injury would be that when I started rolling very often, you know, and for very months at a time, this would happen every time I rolled, my arm would basically shut off. If you imagine that there was a fucking power switch to your shoulder, after about 5 or 10 minutes of grappling, someone would flick it off and my shoulder would basically go dead. And that was just my body going, no, we don't get to use this thing right now. It's not in a good way. And, you know, that was for the first 6 months, or maybe for the first 3 or 4 months, again, another theory was that I had my labrum. If you imagine the top of your bicep is here. I don't know. Is this podcast videoed as well, or
yeah, it is
just the audio? Okay, cool. So for people watching, I've got my hand in a fist and then my other hand over the top here. And if you know, this is sort of the socket of your shoulder, and this is your humerus, your upper arm going into that socket. And the labrum is the connective tissue that attaches the two of those. And I believe that it was fraying. So it was not completely detached, but it was coming detached, and then it was reattaching after a little bit of rest, and then coming. So for about 3 or 4 months, I had a few good weeks, a few bad weeks, a few good weeks, good month, bad month, like that. And then at one point, it completely detached. And at that point, it was every single time I rolled, arm would go dead. And this is actually in the lead up to my fight against AJ Agazarm on Polaris 2, which is a fight that I had to pull out. I was meant to fight him on Polaris 1, and I had to pull out because I tore my knee competing, and I didn't want to pull out again because I thought, you pull out once, it gets rescheduled. You pull out twice, it's game over. You don't get that fight again. I really wanted that fight. So I pushed through. In the week leading up, you know, I basically couldn't. It was a 15-minute match, and I couldn't train for more than about 5 or 6 minutes at a time because my shoulder was just completely gone at that point. And I remember the week leading up to that fight, I was getting massage on my shoulder every single day. A friend of mine is a really good masseuse. I was having to get massage every single day in order to keep myself functional for that fight. Of course, when the adrenaline hits you in the fight, it doesn't matter, and you can just crack on. And obviously that was a fight that really, that was a real defining point of my career. After that fight, my popularity peaked, and I was able to go from really struggling to make a living out of jiu-jitsu to being able to make a living out of jiu-jitsu. So thank God I had that fight. After that fight, though, I was like, my shoulder is still really, really bad. And after being injured, being every single time I was going home from training, I was devastated that my shoulder's like, it's fucked the whole time. And I went to see people about this. They said, you know, stop lifting weights, stop training, we've got to try to do rehab. And for the first time in my life, I was like, okay, I'll stop doing weights, I'll stop doing jiu-jitsu, and I'm just going to focus on my rehab. And after about 2 or 3 months of me doing very, very little on the mats, and, you know, still teaching and stuff like that, but doing very little training and very little weightlifting, you know, things that I like to do, he was like, you know, we're getting better. And I'm like, well, actually, I'm not getting better. I'm just getting better at the physio exercises, because those are the only exercises that I'm doing. And this is the one thing that really clicked for me. I was like, just because you're better at doing your rehab exercises doesn't mean you're getting closer to the end goal of getting back on the mats. So at that point, I went and saw someone else, and in 2 minutes, they were able to tell me, your labrum's teared, your labrum is torn. And 2 days later, I was under the knife. So that was sort of, instead of it being a negative thing, which is, oh, you've got to have surgery, it was an incredibly positive thing, because for the previous 9 months, jiu-jitsu was a real miserable experience for the first time in my life. So finally, I was going to get it fixed. Yes, I was going to be off the mat. I wasn't going to be able to train hard for 6 months. But when I got back on the mat, hopefully, you know, you got to stay positive. Hopefully, I'm going to be back to doing what I love to do and doing it pain-free. And thankfully, that was the case.
Yeah, no, definitely. Mindset is just like the most powerful thing, right? Like you could have just been so negative about that situation, but you weren't. You were positive, and you came back stronger, right, and better, which is amazing. Who would you say has been your toughest opponent so far to date?
Yeah, a few people have asked this question. You know, it's very hard to quantify toughness. You know, in terms of, you know, is it someone who smashed me real fast? Is it someone who I won against, but they were incredibly strong? Or is it someone who, you know, just ground me down for an entire fight? I've kind of had them all, to be honest with you. You know, I've been very fortunate to go up against some really good grapplers. You know, in terms of, I fought, yeah, go on.
I was just gonna say, let's just say in terms of, you know, after the fight, you were like, wow, like this guy is definitely, you know, on a different level. Or have you ever had any thoughts like that?
Do you know what? I've definitely fought guys that are on another level. You know, I fought not long ago, a couple of years ago, a little while now. I fought Matthias Dinnis, who is, you know, went on to win obviously ADCC under 88 kilos. So he's pretty much the, you know, best grappler at under 88 kilos in the world, or one of the best grapplers under 88 kilos in the world. I had a match with him. The thing is with that match, I didn't take it very seriously because I had a match coming up a little while later that I was more interested in. In hindsight, I wish that I took the match a little bit seriously. So he kind of beat me up, but couldn't submit me. But he was very, very good. I wish that, you know, not saying that if I took it more seriously, I would have beaten him, but maybe I would have been able to do something. But he was very, very good. I fought a few guys who are extremely high level, but, you know, probably statistically, you'd probably have to say that Matthias is probably the best up there.
Well, yeah. Thing is, though, like, you're up there with them, right? Like, you're like, you know, you're in that pool with them.
Well, he couldn't submit me, so I'm taking it as a win.
That's brilliant. No, that's amazing. What are your goals at the moment, Dan? Because I know you do commentating, you know, you've got your own podcast as well. What are your goals like for the future now?
Yeah, you know, so for me, obviously, you know, the last year has been a pretty horrible year for everyone. For me, it just came at a really, and I'm definitely not trying to say that it came at a convenient time, but for me, it came at a really inconvenient time because I've been teaching jiu-jitsu for the last 12 years. And at the end of 2019, I left teaching. I was teaching full time, running 5 days a week, a NAGA program out of Mill Hill. And I left that at the end of 2019 in order to focus on myself a bit more with the goal of traveling, training, and competing, because I was doing a lot of seminars and I was teaching a lot. So, you know, 2018, 2017, 16, a lot of seminars, a lot of teaching, not enough time for competing. And I'm not getting any younger. So I decided that I was going to focus on myself for a couple of years, really focus on cementing myself as a top competitor and doing the best that I could on some of the higher level shows around the world. And then a few months later, the whole world closed down and I was unable to sort of do anything after that. So I went from, the plan was to be competing more than I've ever competed before. And of course, it turned out being that I competed less than I've ever competed before. So my priority at the moment, as the world starts to open up, is hopefully to compete more. You know, I have a few things on the horizon now. My main goal in competition is to qualify. I qualified many years ago. 2011 is when I qualified. So I'm looking to re-qualify for ADCC, which is going to be in September. If I don't make it in the September one, then I'm going to do the one next year because there's 2 European trials. So my goal is to get to ADCC next year. So because obviously they postponed it for a year, it was meant to be this year, but it's going to be in 2022 now. So my goal is to get to ADCC and put on the best showing that I can there. You know, that really has been my goal as a competitor for as many years as I remember. The ADCC is the Olympics of grappling, of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, of submission wrestling. That is the goal, to be, you know, to go there and to win or to medal. And, you know, I'd love to be the first British male to medal in ADCC. So that's the goal competition wise. Obviously, there's other stuff that I'm doing as well. You know, in terms of the podcast, I haven't done any podcasts. I do all of my podcasts in person. So it means that over the last year, I haven't been able to record any. But again, with stuff looking a little bit on the up in the UK, hopefully I can get that going again, maybe in the next month or so. I've got a few big names that I'm eyeing up, and hopefully I can get that going again. In terms of the commentating is not something that I ever pursued, but it sort of pursued me, and I, you know, very rarely say no to a good opportunity. You know, I'm really enjoying the Cage Warriors commentating, and you know, we've got another show in June, which I'm looking forward to being on, and who knows, you know, if the other commentating opportunities come up, then that might be something that I go to as well. And then in the future, you know, of course, I'd like to, like most people do, like to open a gym at some point. So, you know, in terms of the commentating and really in terms of the podcast as well, and a lot of the stuff that I do, I think my overall goal in life is to bring grappling, to increase grappling's popularity, and to bring jiu-jitsu and grappling's, you know, more eyes onto the sport. And if you're a very high level competitor, you're more able to do that, hence the competitions. And the commentary for me is, I feel, actually one of the most effective ways of getting more people interested in grappling, because obviously MMA is a much bigger sport than grappling, and people who are interested in MMA, not all of them are interested in pure grappling off of the back of that. So my goal really as a commentator is to make the grappling in MMA seem as interesting as possible, so people think, wow, that sounds pretty cool, actually, maybe I'll give it a go. So all of these things sort of have that wider goal of bringing grappling as a sport, you know. And you said very early on about what you said with Robert Drysdale, and, you know, I kind of pick up on that now. Yeah, you know, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu or an American Jiu Jitsu, a British Jiu Jitsu. For me, I don't even really call it Jiu Jitsu. For me, it's grappling. I think whether it's wrestling, judo, sambo, catch as catch can, or, you know, all of these different things, or gi or no gi jiu-jitsu, all of these things for me sit under the same banner, which is grappling, which is fighting without strikes, basically. That is the thing that I love. And, you know, I'd like to get that more popular, basically.
Yeah, I think that it is, you know, as the years go on, it is getting more and more popular. I know that a lot of celebrities, like Demi Lovato was on Joe Rogan the other day, and they were talking about jiu-jitsu. She's like blue belt now, and, you know, Tom Hardy and loads of other like celebrities are starting to get involved in it as well. So I think as the years go on, it will definitely, you know, grow to be bigger and bigger for sure, 100%. Well, that's amazing. It's good that you've got loads of things going on, and it'd be awesome to see you in ADCC. That'd be amazing to see for sure.
That's the goal, to get back there, definitely.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Just before I let you go now, Dan, I just want to ask you this question. I asked it to all my guests.
Yes.
Kind of interesting to see what they say. What would you tell your younger self if you could go back in time?
Do you know what? I did a podcast not long ago, and I don't, and he asked that question. I don't really have an answer for it, but I was talking to someone who I train with, who is 15 years old, and it occurred to me what I would go back and tell myself, my younger self, when I started jiu-jitsu around 15. And it's an interesting one. It is one that sort of when people ask that question, they're asking, as a beginner, what's the advice? And I usually give the same spiel, which is, you know, persistence, you know, and these are all true. They're just a bit cliche, you know. Keep trying to learn, use your technique, try and relax, you know, all of the basic stuff that everyone would tell you. The big piece, genuine piece of advice that I tell myself if I could go back and talk to a 15-year-old me would be, don't cut weight. Don't cut weight when I was 15, when I was 16, when I was 17. It's not good for you. No one gives a crap what you do in the, you know, when you're in your teens. Really, not very many people care about how you do as a blue belt or a purple belt. Really, if you're looking to be a world champion at black belt, even what you do at brown belt, unless it's, you know, winning the world championships, no one cares that much. It's one of those things where, you know, you're judged by your category, right? So when you're 15 years old and you're smashing it up in the juvenile division, people take notice of you. But as soon as you turn 18, everything that you did in the juvenile division doesn't mean anything, you know? It's about what you can do now. So now you're in the adult blue belt division and everyone's got their eyes on you and it's what you can do in that division. And then you get your purple belt and nobody cares what you did at blue belt. And then you get your brown belt and nobody cares. You understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I made the mistake of trying to give myself these tiny advantages, if they were even an advantage, when I was 15, 16, 17 years old, cutting weight, you know, which is something that you should not be doing until, in my opinion, until you're in your 20s, maybe even until you're in your mid-20s, you shouldn't be thinking about cutting weight. Now, that's not to say be fat. That's about saying don't try and drastically reduce your calories in order to cut kilograms or more to try and get into a different weight division, because it's not worth it. It's harsh on your body. It's unhealthy. And at the end of the day, you cut 5 kilos to win some tournament when you're 15 years old. No one's going to care in 10 years. So that would actually be my advice to a 15-year-old Dan Strauss.
That's actually interesting you say that. A lot of even adults, like, you know, in the UFC the other day, I forgot her name, but she like fainted twice. Yeah. And, you know, some people just say they should just take away weight cutting altogether, right?
Yeah.
What is your opinion on that? Do you think that shouldn't be the case?
Yeah, it is different for MMA, but you're seeing it more with these super fights. You're seeing more shows with very drastic weight cuts. In MMA, it's really part of the culture, unfortunately, that you are expected to, you know, if someone, you know, you meet someone who's walking around at 90 kilos and they say that they're an MMA fighter, you're going to go, well, I assume that you compete at welterweight, which is 77 kilos. You know, which is a scary thing because, you know, middleweight is 84 kilos. And the fact that if someone's only 5 kilos heavier than middleweight, you go, well, you're obviously too small to be a middleweight. You're going to have to cut to 77 kilos. So you see this all the time. And I think it's really unhealthy. You know, I think and you do see, I had a friend of mine who was a pro MMA fighter and he used to cut a lot of weight, and like his kidneys shut down for like years and years. You know, the guy was having to go to the toilet every half an hour for years because of the damage that he did to his body. You know, what an unhealthy lifestyle. So yeah, definitely. I think that there should be a change in the way that they do the you know, especially on the big shows like the UFC. I know that ONE FC do something and the UFC have brought something in, but they're not really, it's not harsh enough on people who cut lots of weight. So I think that people should be competing more at their walk around weight. In jiu-jitsu, you know, without the same day weigh-ins, you're not going to see someone cutting 20 kilos, or, you know, or 15 kilos, 10 kilos, whatever they cut in MMA. But you will see people cutting a little bit. And, you know, I remember when I competed in the World Championships, the first ever Nogi World Championships when I was 16. And, you know, even though I did win that, you know, the lifestyle that I was living in the week up to it was super unhealthy and something that I would, you know, if I could go back in time, I wouldn't do, you know, so.
No, of course, no. Yeah, thank you so much, Dan. Honestly, I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, mate.
What I'll do, guys, I'll leave all of Dan's social media down below. Go and check him out. You won't be disappointed. But yeah, no, honestly, thank you so much. I hope to see you soon as well. Obviously,
absolutely.
You don't live far from here. We're in Wales, Swansea, so you know you can come down whenever you want, of course. And I'll see you on ADCC as well soon.
Absolutely. Cheers, brother. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Dan. Take it easy. Enjoy.
Take care, brother. Have a good one, mate. Bye-bye.